Executive Mayor, thank you very much indeed for joining us and giving us this opportunity to get a sense of how our city is doing. 8 months on the job now, how is the job going?
Thank you very much, Peter. It's going very tough. 3 months into the job, we were hit by a pandemic storm of coronavirus. We went into a lockdown, so we had to change operations away from our plans, away from the plans adopted by council and approved by council. So we had to be in emergency mode. We had to govern through a crisis, really leadership through a crisis. And we only got to level 2 last week. So, we only returning to normality last week. So it's been quite difficult, including passing the budget, consulting communities virtually. It's unprecedented, but so far so good.
So with that in mind, what would you say is the state of the city?
We like healthy overall. Financially, we're struggling a bit, but we're getting there. People have lost jobs. We had given people moratoriums not to pay, but we tightening up credit control. I think the general state of health of the financial health of the city is fine. It could be better, but it's fine. We are managing internally the infection rate of COVID. So the health of our employees is generally fine. We've had like 2,000 infection or so out of 22,000. So we've done well. Only lost about 3 lives. May their souls rest in peace. The rest has been recoveries. So we've been on a roadshow ourselves to thank the frontline staff. The whole of a week and a half I've been going morning, night to talk to the JMPD staff, to thank them for being on the front line. So, and deal with their psychological state of being and reassure them that the leadership is with them in this time of crisis. So overall, I think it's fine. As it relates to the communities, I think because of the distress brought down by lockdown and people not earning salaries, being short of food, others are aging because of lack of alcohol and cigarettes. We find that the social tinder was just about to catch fire. Society's aging, residents are aging. Coupled with in the townships, you have a serious electricity issue. The ESCOM issue is very, very serious. There's been a huge land invasion affecting the already established houses. So the reliability of supply of electricity has been very erratic. Water pressure in other areas has been low. So we are finding that society is very edgy and we need a lot to go and pacify. But we've engaged churches, the faith-based organizations to work with us in trying to reach out to communities and to get better. So the overall state of the city, I say, is healthy, notwithstanding the problems I've described.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. Let's talk a little bit about COVID-19 and some of the stresses. And I'm just wondering how the city has coped in terms of managing it. There was this fear that we'd be overrun once we got to the peak, but it looks as if we've just made it through.
Yes, we expected August to be, to have a first wave of a peak. We were preparing for the worst. We are still preparing for the second wave around October because we believe now with level 2, the rate of infections will increase because especially opening up of alcohol and cigarettes. So we're expecting a second wave of around October or so. But we've done well as a city. As I said, we went into a crisis mode. So we've developed 6 pillars of our response to COVID. And each pillar had a champion, political champion. So I chaired what they call a local command center. And we then, in each pillar, quickly, it's the public health pillar, both pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical responses, education, social distance, wear a mask and all those. So we did that, then we got an MMC to run that. The other pillar, we responded via food because of food distress. So we call it food resilience program that again is run by MMC to say there's a food bank, vegetables, we've got the market. What do we do with home gardens, subsistence agriculture, hydroponic agriculture? That's that type of response. The third, of course, speaks to law enforcement and compliance. People just did not comply in the township. So you'd have seen me doing roadblocks and trying to get them to comply. The fourth, we called it capacity of the state, so that even in the midst of a crisis, can we continue providing quality municipal services? The age profile of our GRA it's like 60 and above, majority, about 60%. So it meant that we could not continue maintaining our roads. That's why the level of potholes you see. And then we had to think of the alternative in our response. Electricity, I've spoken about, water. And then there's an economic response to COVID. What do we do with informal traders, et cetera, et cetera. The last pillar, which is interesting, we call it social solidarity, social and human solidarity. How do we get in solidarity with the people who are in distress, the infected, the affected? How do we mobilize society in all facing the same way in fighting this invisible virus, invisible enemy? So in the totality of those pillars, we got that our response was actually quite effective. We're actually now moving from what you call response to recovery. Because we can't be responding. How do we recover from that?
Well, let's talk about some of the bread and butter issues. So there are people out there who haven't received an income since March, a lot of them. They're not even going to go back to companies because they're shut down. Johannesburg, because of where it's placed in the country's economy, has to kick in quicker than everywhere else so that the country will benefit. What's the plan to get jobs, to get businesses, to get going again?
We are crafting those plans. The premier has called me tomorrow to ask me what is Joburg's input into economic recovery. I'm having a meeting with like the 10 top CEOs of the companies in Johannesburg, including the JSE, to see how we move the cash into productive use. To deal with the investments, I won't call it investment strike, but for lack of a better word, investment strike. We are aware that most people will be moving into informality. How do we work with informality to ensure that at the very least, we deal with the subsistence and then we can deal with affordability and all that. So there are plans that we are crafting.
All right. The other issue, of course, is housing. We're seeing people invading buildings, building illegal structures. And in fact, recently, you had to cancel a trip because of a security risk. Residents angry about the way things were being handled. Red ants becoming more and more notorious over time. How do you manage this? Because this is now your responsibility.
Well, I must send a message that we won't allow anarchy and illegal land occupation or building occupations. Unfortunately, over the last 3 years, the powers that be allowed anarchy to fester, propagated by one political party that we sit within council in exchange for keeping somebody in power. So we thought we'll stop and reverse, contain and reverse the level of land invasion and building invasions that are happening. So that's why we're confronting these and we're not apologetic about it. That's why we did that in Playoff in Loli. We're finding that there's a syndicate that is preying on poor people, that is selling stands that doesn't belong to them. And then those stands are being sold for anything between 1,500 rands, depending whether there's a shack or not. And it's just going on. Next to Avalon Cemetery there. People just arrive and appropriate themselves land. The Takulias land in Lenasia, yes, as I say, the flats in Playoff. So we're dealing with it. And what we want to do, we want to get the face of the qualifying beneficiaries who've been patient enough to talk, because at the moment, the voice that's heard is the voice of the invaders and the anarchists who really pretend that they're under distress. Meanwhile, it's actually syndicates and criminals, in my view. Then we're working with the police to root out that criminal element.
You talked about the previous administration. Are you suggesting that you took over a city in distress that you're starting to put back together again? Or because, for us citizens, we'll hear a former mayor say, no, we were doing a great job. You come in and say, no, they weren't doing a great job. Who are we to believe?
I don't really waste my time talking about another person. I focus on the work that I do. I don't spend my time because I just think that it's negative energy and it's not beneficial to the citizens of Johannesburg. But in describing that, when we left in 2016, there were 116 formal settlements, and we're busy formalizing them. And they come from 1990, 1989, and some of them, of course, during the time of the democracy. And 3 years later, you've got 214 informal settlements. I mean, a growth of about 50 odd. Just tells you what happened in 3 years. And in Ekurhuleni, only one informal settlements came about, Dalimpofu. Here in Joburg, about 55. So just in Chinese West, about 60. It just tells you that the focus has not been on containing land invasion and really controlling the growth of the city. And uncontrolled growth of the city is expensive because they'll need services. The next day they'll be in the street demanding electricity, water, and all that. So really that's what I'm talking about. But what we are focused on, the work we do, we're really not worried about Mashaba.
One of the things that citizens have been complaining about are billings, water, electricity, fluctuations that are unexplainable. Have you gotten on top of that? Is this something that you can assure citizens that you're going to get a grip on?
I must say that in the last 8 months, there's not been my focus, but because of the noise that I've had, especially post-COVID or post the lockdown, it's something that I'm going to spend the next 3 months working with the MMC looking at. Fortunately, I know the space very well, so you can't hoodwink me as it relates to billing. So we'll work on it. I can assure residents that we'll really work on it. I mean, I've seen my own water bill and I got shocked. But the level of queries has spiked. Something that I'm going to work on.
Let's talk a little bit about the city's finances. Part of the challenges often with municipalities is where the money goes. And sometimes it gets drained through corruption. So let's start with you. You must be relieved that your party has cleared you of allegations of corruption.
But I never doubted that we did something wrong. You can see that even the people pushing, keeping the story alive, our political adversaries. The story came out once, said you make up your mind. It never developed. I answered it. And I put everything and gave every document to my party. I wrote to the public protector, and the public protector said it's not my space. And I said, look, I'm prepared to subject myself to any institution and subject myself to scrutiny. So I never doubted that in the years I was in business and in the years I joined the city, I would have done anything wrong. So, but I'm relieved that at least we can move forward within the party. You realize that the same press conference, two of my comrades, were asked to step aside and all that. So I'm relieved that for me it went positive. I can focus on serving the people of Johannesburg.
So you've been cleared, but it's hard to believe that there isn't corruption still in certain areas of the city. What are you going to do to manage that? If we see some of the tender drama that's playing out, particularly during this COVID time, citizens are angry,
and understandably so. And I'm joining them in my disappointment and anger. I joined the president when he said we must hang our heads in shame. We kept the structure that my predecessor put together, which is the group forensic, and General Sibia has been doing a good job. I've given him lots of space to say, don't even consult me when you and please investigate without fear or favor, whether it's politician or any administrator. And we've tried to put mechanisms in place and send a message that with limited resources, we will not allow anyone to put their hands in the cookie jar, or to have favoritism or maladministration of sorts. So we've sent a message. During the COVID time, remember the beginning, everyone was pushing, but 2 weeks later, we just said, we must put probity in place. We'd rather be slow, which is why we were accused of not having PPEs, because we had to apply brakes and say, no, we can't continue without checks and balances. uh, things like what happened in our province, we really avoided them to happen. And any malfeasance, we're gonna deal with ruthlessly.
Let's talk about crime, because that's another big thing for society. There was a bit of a pause because of COVID-19 and the lockdown, but now as we're easing back, I guess there's an expectation we'll probably start to see things rise again, especially given a lot of people are pretty desperate. How are you going to get a grip on crime?
It's a worry. I mean, we've got the Safer Cities program as our priority. Today, I know that our chief of police is with the province mapping out, what the hotspots, the risk areas, the sorts of crimes. We're seeing a lot of pickpocketing in the city. The carjackings are increasing. So we really are wanting to intensify working with SAPS because we can only help them prevent crime and arrest, but it's really a provincial competency. But we're intensifying our ward-based policing, patrols. It's now an increase of, operational costs and all that. But we think visible policing is the way to go.
All right. So one of the things that Johannesburg has always had to grapple with is migration from other parts of the country. And that must play havoc on your planning, health facilities. How are you going to manage that? Because now inter-provincial travel has been allowed again.
In our plans, we include an assumption that 10,000 people are coming to Joburg every month. And of course, statistically, it's been proven over time that about 120,000 or so people come to Joburg every year. Our worry is where they settle. We've seen them settle on the fringes of the city. It explains why people would fall prey to land invasion and being sold stands. They don't have jobs. They're migrating rural poverty now. They turn it into urban poverty. So it's a big, big worry. In fact, the province calls it a mega trend. Urbanization is a mega trend, and must tell us what to do in the future. At the moment, the only thing we can do really is to try and contain land invasion and push them into high density areas like the inner cities, low cost housing, social housing, and all that, so that we can control that growth. But it's a big, big worry and a big challenge.
So transport, another big thing. What is the mayor's plan to make sure that we have safe and reliable and plentiful transport?
Remember, we have two bus services, Rea Vaya and then Metro Bus. We're trying to get Metro Bus to a level where it can be reliable. Rea Vaya, we're completing the third phase, which is Protocols down Louis Potter into Alex, over that bridge into Catherine Street, and then into stop at Sentin City. And then the next phase, which starts next year, goes right through to Midrand. And we're linking with Tshwane and Ekurhuleni and linking with the how train buses and all that. So we think that if we can succeed to move people off their cars into a reliable public transport, firstly, we will deal with congestion, and secondly, people can get quicker to work and can be more productive. Our worry is that the rail, which we relied on from the south to Johannesburg, the rail has been vandalized. The cables have been stolen. They've been stolen, the rail lines between here and Grasmere. So we engage with National to say, look, the sooner you get rail back on track, the better, because our people rely on rail from Soweto Naledi to town, from Vereeniging right through to town, and via New Canada, where everything meets from the western end to town. So rail is an important mode of transport, coupled with our bus rapid transit system.
All right. We talked just now about where people settle when they come into the cities, but over time, we've seen a densification of areas such as Alexandra to a point that there were those protests. There's a pause button pressed there as well. Those issues haven't disappeared. What are you doing to manage that?
When we understood the issues in Alexandra, we understand that something has to happen, something fundamental. It's now there's an interministerial team reporting to the president to deal with issues of Alexander. And remember, Alexander has been very resilient. It's probably the only township, if not one of two, that have survived forced removals. I mean, Sophia Town collapsed, Tugatol in the eastern collapsed, Kaito Mena collapsed. But Alexander stood because, half of, maybe a quarter of Soweto came from Alex, but it still stood. The entirety of Tembisa, Rabbi Ridge, Marlborough, they were trying to decant Alex, but it just seemed to be failing. So it's where people arrive when they come, especially from Limpopo and Mpumalanga. They come and settle in Alexander, and it's been over time. So what we really have to do there, the only solution is walk-ups, high density over time, and National is looking at it. We want to work with them to ensure that Alexander is sorted out.
All right. So one of the areas I lived in when I first arrived in Johannesburg was Berea. I was in Ponty City, iconic towers in the city, but the area as well. And over time, we've seen the challenges the areas has faced. What's your plan in terms of rejuvenating the inner city in particular, given the deterioration that's taken place over time?
We need a 10-year plan, and everyone to focus, not when this mayor comes, you change. From Tate Masondo, I mean, he had this inner city regeneration plan. He had a better buildings program where, you take buildings, you give them to the private sector. OPH bought a lot, and all other property companies. And it was street by street. I mean, starting from Westgate, where the mining houses were, towards Standard Bank and ABSA, so moving towards where Bank City is. And the plan was to deal with the city from there right up to, what used to be Rocky Street and, the hub of arts and all that into Yeoville. And I think it faltered, when we came in 2011, because we tried to change it into an inner city property scheme. That didn't quite work. So Pakistan, we had one plan. We did not build on what Tate Masondo did when Mashaba came with another plan. So what I seek to do now is take all three plans, consolidate them, and then put resources, work with the private sector, and ensure that we do street by street. But on the other hand, I don't think we can start one way. I think we must start as well from the side of Berea, Braamfontein, so that we push. What we're seeing is that as we develop, crime moves further north. It moves to Braamfontein. I mean, the state of Joburg Park, Hillbrow, Berea, Bellevue, leaves a lot to be desired.
All right, so we're starting to run out of time. So let's look forward now. The last local government elections, the ANC was given, I guess, notice by citizens that things got to get better. You've got a few months left, really, to prove that you're worthy of a mandate of some sort. And I'm just wondering, as a citizen, are we ever going to get to a situation where it's not about choosing between parties, but rather saying, whoever we choose, they'll work together for my benefit and my good? What are you doing to make sure that these divides are lessened so that you work together for the good of the citizens?
I think that politics are moving that direction. Firstly, when we were elected, we formed what we called the government of local unity. So we didn't just call it a coalition government. We are a local unity government. We reached out to the two other parties that, well, there are three outside the GNU. It's the Freedom Front Plus, it's the DA and the EFF. We reached out. Amazingly, 90% of council, including the DA, because we sat down and crafted the budget together to say all the 135 wards must benefit from the budget, not one side of a town or the other. We looked at what we seek to take the city to, the GDS 2040. We agreed on the basics. Of course, we differed there and there, but it was just emphasizing one or two things. And 90%, it's only the EFF that rejected our plans and our budgets going into 2021. And we thought that that's a beginning of working environment. We're sitting in council here. DA still has 6 chairpersons of committees. They were discussing with the ANC, why should we pass a motion to remove them? Let's work together in council for the benefit of our communities. That's my motto, because this Joburg is Joburg of all of us. I mean, I'm from a generation that fought for one city, one tax base. So it's a united city, it's a unicity. There's no Soweto. Well, St. Alexander, the contradictions, but we want everyone to be satisfied. So we are working together.
All right. And then finally, next year, when I go into the polling booth and I have to make up my mind about you, what will I measure you on? What are you promising to do for me so that I can look at your name favorably when I go into that voting booth?
We trying to lead the city to unite and to do the basics. There's a term we use that the daily lived experience of Johannesburg citizens must be positive. And that's what will determine what you do there, because the mood. Elections are about the mood, about how you judge. When you wake up in the morning, is there water? Is there electricity? Is there collection of refuse? You don't hit the pothole. The traffic lights are working. You are not late. If they are not working, the appointment, grass is being cut. The upkeep of the city, just the living environment, the built environment is positive. We are beginning to lessen crime. So those are just the basics. Of course, in Soweto, they'll tell you about you want roads, you want stormwater, you want all these things. So we have to balance the two things. But in 12 months, we have to focus on the basics, and we are focusing on the basics only.
All right. Well, you've given us a good list to work on, and we look forward to that conversation just before the elections next year.
Thank you, Peter. And we're looking forward to talk to you, even before the elections. You can measure us in between.
Thank you very much, Executive Mayor.
Hi, I'm Pops Mudikwani, and you're watching Joburg Today. Not yesterday, to die. You die, to die.